Steve Laws is often criticised for being extreme and unrealistic. All he's good for is dragging opinion our way. His views will never be mainstream and they alienate people. I think that is wrong. That's often been said about people. They're too extreme and then they turn out to be quite mainstream and quite powerful. I think his views will turn out, if anything, to be quite moderate. Now, I think I should start by just defining what his position is. So if I do this, now what you've got is a couple of tweets from him. This one here, we keep going until all the natives are at the very least 95% of the population. It's not personal, it's necessary. So that basic position is that Britain or England should be 95% British or English, as defined by ancestry. That underneath is this 7-step process for achieving it. And also he mentions, again, here, I think this is 2024, that's the 95% plan. So the plans to get to, at the very least, 95% to secure our future. So that's what he's talking about. I think those numbers will be overachieved. I think 95% will turn out to be quite a modest target in time. I'll come to why I think it'll be. I think it'll be at least 99% primarily because of feedback loops, which is what I've talked about in my last video. I'll put the link to that down below. I think that's important. I think that means that the more we separate out, then the more we will separate out. And the harder line we get, the more hard line we will get. I think that's not necessarily a good thing. I just think it will happen. And so I think that 95% target will be overachieved. But basically, I think Steve Law's approach, that will survive when a lot of the critics, the approaches of the critics of him, will fall away, will melt away. And I think that for two reasons. Firstly, because his thinking is based on, I think, intellectual rigor, clarity, principle that can be defined and then applied. And secondly, because it's based upon sound instincts about what's coming, the change, the accelerating change that's coming at us down the road. Firstly, the intellectual rigor. I think that intellectual rigor, that stands out, that clarity stands out against this blizzard, this cloud of confused thinking that we're getting from all quarters, particularly from multiculturalists and civic nationalists. I think I can best illustrate this by dealing with this little soundbite from Keir Starmer. Give me a second and I'll play it.
What is it to be British? Mm-hmm. And I believe to be British is to be compassionate, reasonable, live and let live, and diverse. And I am proud to serve our diverse country and all of its parts. It is British to be diverse.
Okay, total pretentious drivel, guff, says absolutely nothing. What he's saying there, when he says that to be British, all you have to be is compassionate and reasonable, live and let live, and diverse. First of all, diverse means you have no character. Your character is to be just so many different types of people that there's no identifiable character. So it's a bit like in my day job of planning permission, getting planning permissions. Sometimes what you get is people say this area is defined by a lack of character. It has no character. Therefore, I can build anything I like on it because there's just no character at all, which never survives. It's a bad argument, and that's what Starmer's saying about diversity. But also this idea that anyone can be. You are British if you're compassionate and reasonable and live and let live. Name one people who would say no, none of those qualities apply to us. Everyone's going to say those qualities apply to us. It's intended to be a useless test. I think it's intended to humiliate. That is propaganda intended to humiliate. It's basically saying you've got no character, you've got no identity. We will get you if you say you do. That is a nasty man. His saving grace is that he is useless. Okay, so the next one I want to come to is this fella, Tommy Robinson. There you are, saying the first word where after proclaiming that he just wants a Britain where British people are put first, Tommy Robinson is asked, who are the British people? First words out of his mouth, it's not white people. Let me play this to you.
I just want a Britain where British people are put first. and that's it. Just British people put first.
Who are those British people?
It's not white people, it's British people.
Right. Does it include me?
Of course it includes you, yeah.
Does it include Muslim?
Of course it includes Muslims.
Total drivel, nonsense, guff. So a Britain where British people are put first, and British people seems to include everyone, certainly includes Muslims, I'm guessing. That it would include black people. It just includes everyone. It's the reason I quote Tommy Robinson there is because he's so good at getting it wrong. I find he's always wrong. I associate that with his criminality, and this is an example of him just saying nothing, working himself into a stew to say nothing. Now, I could quote loads of examples of similarly stupid thinking. People saying, well, if someone served in the army, or you can't deport anyone because there have been some black people in the army. Ridiculous, stupid suggestion. The most stupid one I heard was someone saying that you're British if you can enjoy the taste of fish and chips on Brighton Beach. Now, my point is that against that huge cloud of just confusion, confused, meaningless thinking that is beyond any definition, that against that, if you have someone talking something that is clear, that is definable and will stand, then that person or that person's approach is likely to stand the test of time. And I think that's clear with Steve Law's approach, which is simple, it stands on its own, and that is that your ethnicity is defined by your ancestry, and that we need to focus on a high percentage of that. That is clear. It has logical rigor to it, and that's not just a nerdy thing. It means that that point of view will endure. Everything else is just wind. It's just guff. It's just a puff of air that gets blown away and will get blown away. Now, secondly, I think Steve Law's approach responds well to the chaos that is accelerating down the road at us. I think he has sound instincts in that regard. I think he understands what's coming, and his views are based on, I think, a sense that that fast change is coming. We may not agree with the majority may not agree with what he's saying now, but they will agree in increasing numbers fast, and I think he's right about that. And I disagree with him about the mechanism. I think he thinks it will come about through state power and through voting. I don't. I think it will come about through state collapse and the death of the state, including the democratic state. That doesn't necessarily mean the death of democracy, but it means that the death of the current vehicle for democracy, which is the state. That's a big difference between us, but I think even if he's wrong about the mechanism, I think the overall effect, the very, very rapid, huge shift in opinion, which will come as a result of the state system breaking down, I think he senses that. He understands that that is coming. And in circumstances like that, historic iron principle gets swept away within days. You might get shootings, people get a demonstration gets fired on in the streets, or someone is found to be in cahoots with a foreign power, and then suddenly it's all swept away. I'm thinking of the French Revolution or the English Civil War, long-held, centuries-old principles that no one ever thought would change at all. Suddenly they're completely just thrown out of the window. So I think Steve Law senses that a fast change is coming, and that is another reason why I think his views will prevail and why they will come to seem to be quite mainstream and quite moderate in time. Now, the reason to look at what Steve Law is saying, the reason I'm critiquing, it's not just to sing his praises, it's because I think it's a good vehicle for looking at what we can expect, what is coming at us, where we're likely to be in a few years' time. And a good vehicle for doing that, I think, is to look at Carl Benjamin's criticism of Steve Law. So I want to move to that now. Now, that was the video that Carl Benjamin did on the Steve Laws question, where he's criticising or critiquing what Steve Laws is saying. And I want to go through that. I disagree with Carl Benjamin, but it's not to have a go at him. They were really nice when I did an interview in Swindon with Dan at Lotus Eaters. They're a really nice bunch of fellas. They were very nice to me, and it was nice of Carl to invite me. So I don't want to stab him in the back by giving him a hard time, but I disagree with him, and I think disagreeing with him sheds light on what Steve Laws is saying, and that in turn sheds light on what I think we can expect over the next few years. Now, in that video, Carl Benjamin, he had, I think, really, I would narrow it down to about 4 heads of disagreement. The first is that Steve Laws is making extreme demands, they're unrealistic. The second, that he is being impractical and contradictory. And the third is that the fundamental demand within society is more moderate, it's less far-reaching, and fourthly, that a more moderate approach is needed in order to unite people, moderation that people can unite around. And I want to go through each one of those because I don't think any of those applies. So if I deal with the first one, and what Carl Benjamin says is that Steve Laws is making extreme demands. And I think he refers to him as the Greta Thunberg of the right, saying that he doesn't have a plan as to how to achieve it, and effectively he's in a cul-de-sac. And I disagree with that. I think if we get, I think it is unavoidable, inevitable, that we're going to get substantial fracturing of the state system for economic reasons. The economy goes down, that means state finances go down, that means the welfare state goes down, because if the state goes broke, it can't provide welfare. Then I think public anger will lead to a rejection of state authority, and I think a broke state that no longer commands, whose authority is no longer accepted by people, will fall over. And then after a collapse like that, I think there will be very substantial public demand for what Steve Laws is saying. And I think that's for, I can see 3 reasons why I say that. Firstly, I think ordinary people, ordinary battlers who don't have assets and don't have a high income and are not connected to, not connected in, those ordinary people have a naturally high level of ethnocentrism for a number of reasons. If you're poor and you have few material, tangible assets, the intangible assets, like your sense of identity, they become more valuable to you. And also they're valuable because they're useful as a way of asserting your value, as a defense against class prejudice, against class exploitation. Because you can say, you may look down your nose at me, but I'm as English as you. So I'm basically the same as you. Don't you get so high and mighty. Don't come the class snobbery with me. And I think if you're poor, that is valuable to you. Secondly, I think that if the state falls over, I think we will see very hard, aggressive feedback loops, which will force populations to separate out. And the more it happens, the more it will happen. Again, I dealt with that in the last video that I did, which talked about feedback loops. Briefly, what I think will happen is if say, the English population of this country splits 50-50, I think, or 50% say they want to live in English-only areas under an English-only system that doesn't allow foreigners to join, then and actually, I don't think it will be 50-50. I think it'll be 80-20. I think English people will rush at the chance to get back their sense of identity and of living amongst English people with an identity that people can share and enjoy. But supposing it's 50-50, what happens is the multicultural half of the English population say, yes, I love all this multiculturalism. It's great. It's a matter of principle for me. Suddenly, they'll find, hold on, so the ratio of foreigners has, the concentration of foreigners, that has doubled. The foreigner density has doubled overnight. That's too much for me. And then perhaps half of them go and join the English area. And so the foreigner density doubles again and again and again. You see the feedback loop working. And then what people will, the more it happens, the more the separation, the ethnic separation happens, the more it will happen. And I think that those feedback loops will mean that people will resort to a very natural, quite hardline ethnocentrism, which it might be more hardline than Steve Laws in many instances. And on top of that, I think thirdly, what you'll get is a general enjoyment of the sense of identity. the enjoyment of traditions and habits and states of mind, just shared emotions that arise when you live amongst people who look, act, think, and speak like you do. That's commonly referred to as patriotism, and I think that will arise. So I think ordinary people are not, if the state goes down, ordinary people are not likely to see Steve Laws as extreme. I think they'll probably outpace him, if anything. Secondly, Carl Benjamin said that Steve Laws was being impractical and contradictory. I think contradictory in that Steve Laws says that identity is inherited and it comes through ancestry, but yet he excludes mixed race people. I think the idea being that if someone is half English and half black, by excluding a mixed race person, you're excluding that part of their English, the part of them that is English. I think ordinary people will be quite hard line about that. I don't think ordinary people will are likely to say, you've got some English ancestry in you, that means you're in. I think they'll say, you have foreign ancestry in you, that means you're out. Now, the reason I think that is because my experience dealing in the criminal courts many years ago is that I have the impression that mixed race Afro-Caribbean people are as highly criminalized as African or Caribbean people. And if I think that, I suspect quite a lot of people do. And the question then for ordinary people becomes, am I willing to stick to that level of multiculturalism if the cost means I have to pay money in order to be subjected to crime? So if the state falls over and you have to pay for law and order via subscriptions, then having criminal people amongst you costs you money because you have to pay to police it and to enforce against it, and people don't, and you have to pay because you're subjected to crime. So if you say to people, if people are faced with that choice, your multiculturalism means you're paying money, more money than you should do, in order to be subjected to crimes, and then to pay again for higher insurance premiums and things like that. And I think people will say, actually, then my multiculturalism can go out of the window. It's obviously wrong. So I don't think that Steve Laws is being contradictory if he talks about excluding mixed race people. I think we will be surprised how hard line people get about that. Now, the third point that Carl makes about Steve Laws is that the fundamental demand is for something more moderate than what Steve Laws is calling for. What Carl says is that the fundamental demand is for demographic security. He doesn't define that. That's vague and non-specific. That the idea of security, that tends to, I suspect that's an emotional felt thing, an intangible thing that that can't be defined, that isn't clear. It's one person's security is someone else's insecurity. And so what does it mean? Does it mean that Britain is always more than 50%? There's some constitutional guarantee that we'll always be more than 50% white English. So it's not something that you can't scale that. You can't spread that. It's not a definition that you can use in a variety of circumstances, and so that becomes unenforceable. And if it's unenforceable, it becomes unusable. I disagree with that. I think that if the state falls over, which is what I think is going to happen, I think that will be the defining event. I think that will force us, it will force us onto our own mettle. We'll have to rely on our own decisions about our own safety and security. And it will also, that will then sweep away all the sort of multicultural legal protections, and it will allow us complete freedom of association and non-association. If we have that, I think in those conditions, we will become highly ethnocentrist, because we will say, it's my safety on the line here. I only really trust people who look and think and act and speak like me. And I think people will want more than just demographic security in order to feel safe. And then once they've got that safety, I think people actually take a positive attitude towards it and saying, I like this idea of only being around people who are like me. It's so much easier. It means that we can enforce law and order. It means I'm amongst people who are familiar. We develop shared habits, shared understanding, and I like that. So I think it will go a lot further than pure demographic security. Finally, Carl talks about the need for a more moderate approach that we can all unite around. But then he gives examples that don't really stack up very well. They don't bear much analysis. So the first thing he talks about is some communities. We might want to remove some communities. I think, again, Carl's problem is I don't think he understands or contemplates the idea that the state might fall over, and so partly as a result of that, I think he's looking through the wrong end of the telescope. He's basically saying everyone's okay apart from certain groups that we might want to remove. I think if the state falls over, people will say no one other than the English is English. So that means all other groups are excluded apart from possibly some exceptions. Now Carl talks about excluding the Pakistani, or he talks about the Pakistani rape gangs, and then talks about excluding or removing the community because the community were complicit in those crimes. What does that mean, the community? It's community. When someone says community, that usually means they're trying to avoid being nailed down on anything. They're trying to avoid expressing meaning. And I think that is probably, I suspect that may be true here, because he's not saying we will remove every Pakistani because of the Pakistani rape gangs. Maybe he means that. He didn't say it like that. He talks about the community. And it sounds to me like he means a select part of the Pakistani community, I suspect selected by values or maybe having a provable complicity or just proximity to the gang rapists. But that is not a test that really that is easily defined. Now, another community that Carl seemed to talk about removing is the Boris wave. That's all the people who came over on visas since 2020 under Boris Johnson. But that is not a community. Those people are not defined by anything other than timeline and the fact that they're still here. Because it's 5 years or less since they came here, they're still here on a visa, and the visa can be revoked and they can be denied citizenship. That visa, they can be told your visa will not progress to citizenship or permanent right to remain. So, but what that looks like is a civic nationalist trying to straddle the line with ethno-nationalists by making out that there is a shared ethnic identity to the Boris wave, but there isn't. It's anyone from any part of the world who came over during that period. That is not a logical thread that you can apply across the whole population. That's a relatively small change. That is not enough to permanently reverse the demographic decline. Nor is the next one that Carl talks about, and that is denying benefits and social housing and the access to the NHS to foreigners. Again, I think that is actually as extreme as anything that Steve Laws talks about, in that it requires identifying foreigners and then treating them in different ways that could have life and death effects. If you're denying people dole, if you're denying them social housing, they might end up on the street. If you're denying them access to the NHS, they might die. So I think that's every bit as hard line as anything that Steve Laws is saying, but it's not defined. Stop paying foreigners benefits. Which foreigners? Who are the foreigners? Does that mean anyone who is not ancestrally English? Possibly. Is it the same as what Steve Laws says, or is it values-based? Again, that looks like sort of a kind of a civic nationalist way of saying, we're not excluding you, we're just adjusting the rights that you hold. But it's not, again, it's not defined. If it's not defined, it's very difficult to sustain it. And I think on its own terms, it just won't work. The reason I think it won't work is because I think it's a myth to say that the fighting age males who come here are motivated entirely by welfare payments. They're coming from countries, or Immigration, legal immigration, comes mainly from Pakistan, India and Nigeria. Those are countries where GDP per head is between 1/20th and 1/50th of what it is in Britain, so between 2 and 5% of British GDP per head. So that's like dying and going to heaven for a lot of those people. For Somalis and Afghans, its GDP per head is about the difference in GDP per head is about 100 to 1. What that means is an Afghan or a Somali can come to Britain, and if they get a job, then if they only send home 10% of what they earn back home to mum, she can use that money to employ 10 people. So that 10% of what that Somali or Afghan earns in Britain is equivalent to 10 people's full-time wages back in Somalia. And so his mum can live like Lady Muck, being attended to hand and foot by 10 full-time workers, just on 10% of his salary. That is so denying that person benefits is not enough to get them to abandon, to throw away that increased, that higher income they can earn here and go back to a country where there is no welfare state anyway. There's no NHS in those countries. There's no social housing or no dole money in those countries. I don't think it's going to work. What I will concede is that a lot of those people, once they're here and they've got jobs, they find out about the welfare state and they find, I can bring mum and dad over, I can bring my siblings over, nephews and nieces, and they can all live on the dole. But I am not sure that denying access to welfare benefits would even get rid of those people. Again, because the countries they'll be going back to don't have welfare states. I don't think it's enough. I think they might get something in the nature of a part-time job or get into some form of criminality or something just to make some money, because the wage disparity is so high. So I don't think it will work even on its own terms. Now, the moderate line that Carl talks about is the line. I think the line is put forward by David Gold, a little bit by David Gold. The idea that he doesn't want to get deported, and that's a reasonable urge. I think that is again that's a silly argument. It's a non-argument. It's basically saying, I've got my mate. What about my mate? You can't deport him because he's mates with me. It's a bit like Liam Tuff's line, the line he came out when he interviewed Steve Law saying, what about my mate Footlong? I'm mates with him. I don't want to deport him. I won't. It's no argument to say I'm friends with this person. It's a bit like saying don't prosecute a shoplifter. He's my pal. No, he's committed a crime. You prosecute him. And what that is really is a variation of this. I can't resist playing this one to you. So give me a second.
To understand where I'm from as well, it would mean deporting people that all of us, I'd say pretty much all of us, have a friend or loved one that is of a non-white skin.
So if you heard that, everyone's got a friend who's got a non-white skin, therefore you can't deport people with non-white skins. I think that's the idea. That's similar to the line that Liam Tufts came out with in his interview with Steve Laws, saying, what about my mate Footlong? I like him. You wouldn't deport my mate Footlong. Well, everyone's got a mate called Footlong. You can't construct policy on that basis. I don't have a mate called Footlong, but if that's the basis for people to get to be allowed to remain here, I would put an advert out on eBay saying, pay me 50 grand and if you're not called Footlong, I'll swear blind you are called Footlong and that you're my mate, and then you'll be able to stay here. So I'll make a bit of money that way. You can't construct policy on such a woolly, badly defined basis, on the basis of personal feelings. Ordinary people understand this. People understand the need for rules and that you are subjected to them. People who are not connected in, who don't have a lot of money, realise, well, I'm going to be subject to these rules. I'm going to have to apply by them. And I think if the choice is between living in, if people ever get the choice of being able to live in an English-only area or having to live in a multicultural area, then I think what people will find is they'll be willing to sacrifice those friendships. You may not like that, but I think that is what will happen. And that is another reason why I think Steve Law's approach is consistent. Okay, so again, my purpose is not to sing Steve Law's praises. It is to look at what is coming. And I think it is the harder line that is coming, the ethno-nationalist line that is coming. Again, to repeat, because of two areas, I think it has intellectual rigor, I think and clarity, it's capable of definition, and I think it also responds more realistically to the chaos that's coming down the line at us. And I think Steve Laws has those two qualities, that rigor, that clarity, and that understanding of the accelerating pace of change that's coming. And I think that indicates that his hardline approach is the approach that will last. And the approach of his critics is the approach that will fall away. Thank you.